reception.
Try the radio.
What is this?
I don't know. Hang on!
Stay on my ass!
Hang on!
Get to the cabin.
What? No.
The cabin.
Jed, take care of your brother. You hear me?
Get out of here while you still can. Go, now!
Let's go.
Go!
Be allowed to go free. Well now, my friend. Well now.
Oh, check it out.
All right.
Look pretty cool though, man.
I would say they were way off course. This is very unusual.
You do something, Mr. Teasdale.
What's going on, my friend?
Come on, let's go!
All of a sudden, looking out across toward over the Irish Sea, the tip of the Irish Sea into the North Sea, I was caught up into the heavens and looking down on the earth like a globe. And as I looked down on the earth like a globe, I saw a massive military movement coming out of an area up by the Arctic. And I couldn't figure out what this was, what was going on, why a military, Navy, and Air Force, why it would be going out between the United States and Europe up above Finland, going out through the Icelandic Gap and heading down between the United States and Europe and making a curl all the way around the Horn of Africa toward the Persian Gulf. Now that's significant. When all of a sudden I was alarmed because of that. You would have been too. I looked over toward the United States and I saw something I had never seen in my life. I had never even preconceived the thought of it. I had always thought that the United States was wiser and more powerful than to allow Russian subs to be parked right almost on our beaches per se. What I mean by that is you could see the submarines down under the water, but there were areas that the sand still had drifted on down from the beaches into the depths. And the submarines were sitting there aimed at America. I saw them sprinkled all the way across the East Coast. When I saw that, my family at that time lived in Portland, Oregon. I was alarmed, of course, and I wanted to look over toward Portland to see what was going on. And as I looked across the continent of the United States of this globe, I saw the submarines from way up by Washington, the top of Washington, all the way down around towards San Diego, poised in the same way all the way along our coast in the north from the Pacific side. Then something else caught my attention. I began to see radio towers going up all across the nation. And these radio towers, as they went up, the dotted lines began going out as though they were transmitting. And then there was an alarm went off in me. They're sounding the alarm. We're going to be under attack. The siege is laid. When all of a sudden I was watching these radio dots going out like the transmitting of a warning, and instead of the people being warned, they sprinkled to the ground like dust. And an alarm went off in me, and I cried out in the heavens, and I said, "Oh God, they won't even know what hit them." And at that time, all of a sudden, I looked down on the eastern seaboard at the submarine was drawn to that one right off from New York City. And I saw the missile come right out of that submarine and go right up and come right over the city of New York, and the entire city disappeared. Then I looked down, on down toward Florida. And down there, I could see another explosion take place. I looked across, because of my family being in the Pacific Northwest, I looked across. Another explosion took place up by Seattle, Bellevue. And then another one down by San Francisco. And another one down toward Los Angeles, and another one toward San Diego. And there I stood in shock as I was watching these explosions take place and these cities literally disappearing from off the face of the earth. The next instant, I was standing back down on the Eagle Tower, and I found myself looking down in the village. There was no alarm going off. The cars were going the normal speed. People were walking. I looked out over the bay where there were some British ships, warships, and I watched them and studied them for a few seconds. There was no alarm there. And I found myself saying this: "Oh God, if this has not happened, what will be the sign of it and of its time?" And God spoke to my spirit, and these were the words He said. December the 14th, 1986, before Glasnost, Perestroika, the Berlin Wall was still up. The Cold War was still in full bore run. We supposedly were still on alert. The words were spoken to me: when Russia opens her gates and lets the masses go, the free world will occupy themselves with transporting, housing, and caring for the masses. Will begin letting their weapons down, crying peace and safety, and that's when it will happen. Now the question I submit to you is this: where are we on that scenario? Where are we in that prophetic timetable? Is that vision being fulfilled before our eyes? Are we seeing it literally take place?
Out of the growing tensions between Russia, China, and the United States, ABC News confirms the U.S. dispatched multiple Navy destroyers and an aircraft after tracking Chinese and Russian ships near the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. Alaskan Senator Dan Sullivan calling that foreign patrol unprecedented in size. Let's bring in ABC's Ike Ajachi in Washington for us. Ike, what more are you learning tonight?
Lindsay, the United States taking swift action, sending 4 U.S. Navy warships to the Aleutian Islands after senators said 11 Russian and Chinese ships came close to American waters. Now, officials say those foreign ships were on patrol in international waters conducting a joint naval exercise. The incident highlights the growing cooperation between these two foreign powers, and it's not the first time this has happened. In September of 2022, the Coast Guard spotted Chinese and Russian ships also near the Aleutian Island chain.
I'm holding in my hand 2 pieces of paper that I have looked for about 8 years. My father told me this incident after it happened and called me long distance crying on the phone. I only know of Dad telling this story 2 times in his entire ministry publicly, and I've told it twice, both in military areas. In one military area where I shared this, a man came up to me and he said, "I can't tell you what I do. I work classified. But you gave a code name that's never been publicized in this story of your dad. Anyone who knew him knows that he was extremely modest and extremely humble. He preached at Joe Klein's church several times. He preached. How many of you, Dad, ever came to your church and preached when he was living? Raise your hand. There's just a few people here that he came to. My dad would see things and would get calls from the FBI. And he would tell them what the terrorists were planning and where they were hiding out. I was there in the room when he got the call. My dad, at times, could tell people who were sinning and tell you the license plate number of the car you were in. When my dad said, God has told me something, you could write it down and take it to the bank. See, I am tired of people who try to call themselves a prophet and a prophetess, speaking stuff and missing it, and then trying to work their way around it to make it make sense to somebody. My daddy would tell you, if you miss it, sit down and shut up. If you don't know it's God, don't say it. My dad, when this happened, gave me a call, so shook up. And I'm going to give it to you. And what I'm going to do, I'm not adding to or taking away. Here it is where he wrote it down. This is the original. The date is 1/5/1982. Now, remember what I said about a generation? That just because the Lord gives you a warning doesn't mean tomorrow it's going to happen, next week. It could be 40 years, 50 years before it happens. This is a while back. 3:20 in the morning. Source of information. Dad was up reading a book, a couple bedrooms there, in one of the bedrooms, and a man walked in the house. He thought it was his son Philip coming home from work. Dad looked at the man and said, "Can I help you? Do you need something?" Now he's thinking at first, he says, "I know I'm awake," but he said for some reason it did not mess with me that a guy standing in the house. I thought, well, maybe the door was unlocked, maybe somebody's come in, maybe their car broke down, maybe they knocked and I didn't hear him. But he's not. He said, "Now really, normally by then you're reaching for a bat." But he said he's calmly asking this guy, "Okay?" And the man replied, "I was sitting here to bring you some information." So Dad said, "Well, can we go over to my office?" And so Dad walks over into his study in the house, door is open, and the man never comes in and takes a seat. And he stands in the doorway and he says, "Write this down immediately. The Russian naval, nuclear, submarine services will strike at major American cities without warning. A nuclear fleet is now hiding at Bermuda and Haiti, 25 miles off the coast of the Baltimore-Chesapeake Bay Area, and actually gave him 4 areas where 25 miles off the coast they were hiding. They are undetected at this time because they are in heavy sea traffic lanes. One area is 25 miles off the coast of Boston. Another area is 25 miles off the coast of Florida, but they're in heavy sea traffic lanes. The nuclear crews know how to move in heavy sea traffic. This removes chances of them being detected. They are convinced they're undetected by American forces. They will use heavy, he emphasized, radiation missiles for maximum kill and confusion. Now, Dad's writing this whole thing down. Right here he is. He's writing it down while the guy's talking. The guy would see Dad was finished. He'd repeat something. Thus far, the Russian sub-force crews have come ashore in all staging areas, undetected, for R&R and social testing. Allied intelligence can check out crew members if proper checks on English-speaking crew members are made. Thus far, their sea-to-land testing has been 100% successful. They purchase food, drink, reading material, and the purchases have also been successful. U.S. and Caribbean intelligence forces can detect the Russian sub-crew members if sub-movements are watched closely. Now, this was another thing that blew the guys away, and I'm only going to tell you, one guy told me, he said, "You just gave a code name." I said, "I didn't give a code name. The angel gave the code name." And Dad gave me the code name. This group that's going to perform the attack are called Soviet Knights. Knights, and they call themselves that name because of the years they've been able to go undetected by some of the U.S. naval forces. Now, the U.S. has great satellite, great sonars, great intelligence, but he did say this. Their code name as a unit is called Michael Atlantic. Now, these are names that nobody should know or nobody would know. And I'm telling you, on a couple of occasions, people said, this is scary. And one guy came to me and he said, I'm going to tell you something. He worked in California in intelligence, submarine services for the U.S. He said, all I'm going to tell you, he was shaking. He said, all I'm going to tell you is whoever visited your dad had classified information. And I said, I think it's an angel. He said, well, if it was a man, he'll be tried for treason, for giving out classified information. But he said, I'm telling you, he said, I don't know about all the other detection stuff and the barrier reefs and all. Well, you would have to look into that. But he said, I'm telling you. So when I preached this, the guy said he's absolutely correct. Whoever was there had to be a military guy. I said, how can a military guy vanish in front of your eyes? I was told that the man's dad is writing this as I was told, speaking of the man. I was told that Soviet KGB agents posing as students stole sea maps showing details of particular barrier reefs and passed them to the Soviet naval authorities. The reef was of such a nature that it could not be detected except by U.S. naval forces using a slanted detection system. The sub was sitting on the barrier reef in such a location that sonar as normally used could not detect it. Moving out to sea, they must search at a 45-degree angle. The barrier reef extended out over the sitting sub, protecting it from exposure to surface ships. And by getting the correct angle, the sonar, its hiding place could be discovered. And the guy looked at me and said, absolutely correct. If they're in a reef, because a barrier reef, it's the coral, and I know there's different equipment now probably that's changed all this, but in that day, the coral reef, anything in it, it's in other words, it's a wise move if you're going to put it there. Now, we don't do it because we don't destroy coral reefs. It's an environmental thing. We'd never do it, but other countries would. Now, when the man said this to Dad, this is the part that Dad did not write down, but he called me. He said, when I laid the pen down, I bowed my head over weeping. And he said, when I looked, the man is gone. I get up. The house is safe. I get up. The door is locked. Nobody got in my house. He said, I go back in my office and I start weeping convulsively. He said, it's like when I'm writing, I'm not weeping, and all of a sudden I get to this, and I get to the end, and the realization I'm weeping. And he said, at that moment, I went into a full-color, three-dimensional vision and saw a city devastated by a nuclear blast. And he said, I saw the faces of the people. Everything melted. Flesh is just melting. People in the distance are screaming. And he said, Perry, I do not know when.
Jericho, a small town in Kansas that witnessed a series of nuclear attacks that destroyed 23 American cities in a single day. The attacks crippled and fractured the U.S. government and left our town cut off from the world.
Commander in the Soviet Navy.
Ramey has trained most of their officer corps. He's nearly a legend in the submarine community.
The most deadly submarine ever built.
This thing could park a couple of 100 warheads off Washington. Nobody'd know a thing about it until it was all over.
să spui tot ce-ți
But
vă
you must
spun
tell them
eu.
everything that I tell you.
America va arde.
Again, he said, America will burn.
Cum să ardă America, că America e
I
puternică?
said, but how can America burn when it's so
Tu
powerful?
ține minte așa să le
He said,
spui.
remember and tell them.
Ai să ajungi la televizoare.
He said, you reach TV
Ai să ajungi la
stations
radio.
and radio
Ai să ajungi în
stations
biserică.
and churches.
Să spui tot ce spun eu.
But tell them everything I
Să
tell
nu
you.
ascunzi nimica.
Hide nothing.
America va arde.
America will burn.
Cum va arde America?
But again, how will it burn?
Tu așa să le spui.
He said, tell them this.
Spionajul sovietic
The Russian
au
spies
descoperit cele mai puternice depozite nucleare
have found
americane.
out where the most powerful nuclear plants in America
Când
are.
americanul nu crede că e pace și
When
liniște,
Americans will think it's peace and quiet
toate lucrurile sunt
and
bune.
everything's perfect,
Unele popoare dinăuntru
some groups from the
vor
inside
începe să se revolte împotriva
will
guvernului.
revolt against the government.
Guvernul va fi ocupat cu
The
revoluția
government will be occupied with the
și
revolution,
atunci de pe ocean,
and then from the ocean,
din Cuba,
out of Cuba,
Nicaragua, America Centrală,
Central America,
Mexico
Mexico,
și ne-au mai spus două țări, dar nu le țin
and
minte.
2 other countries that I can't
Va
remember.
bombarda depozite nucleare
They
americane
will bombard the nuclear plants in
și
America,
America va lua foc.
and America will burn.
Dar ce faci cu
I
biserica?
said, what will you do with the church though?
Unele biserici m-au
He
părăsit.
said, many churches have left me.
Cum n-ai tu oameni aici?
I said, what do you mean don't you have people here?
Tu așa să le spui.
He said, tell them this.
Oamenii să slăvesc pe oameni.
People glorify people.
Cinstea care se cuvine să-i o dea
The
lui
honor that
Hristos,
Christ deserves,
oamenii și-o ia asupra lor.
man takes upon himself.
În biserică,
In the church,
divorț,
there's divorce,
preacurvii,
there's adultery,
sodomie,
there's sodomy,
avortul
there's abortion,
și tot felul de păcat.
and all kinds of sin.
Și Hristos nu locuiește în
And
păcat.
Christ will not live in sin.
Hristos locuiește în sfințenie.
Christ lives in holiness.
Și te-am adus pe tine aici.
And I brought you here
Să strigi în gura mare.
that you cry out loud.
Să nu-ți fie frică, că
Don't
eu
be
sunt cu
afraid,
tine.
for I am with you.
Să se oprească de-a păcătuie.
Tell them to stop sinning
Să se întoarcă către Dumnezeu.
and to repent,
Că Dumnezeu nu obosește iertării.
because God never stops forgiving.
Și toți care se vor opri de la
And
păcatele
all of
lor
those who will stop
se
sinning
vor înturna către
and
Dumnezeu.
will repent,
În ziua nenorocirii Dumnezeu îi va salva.
God will save in the day of trouble.
Cum poți tu să salvezi dacă arde America?
But how can he save them if America burns though?
Tu așa să le spui.
He said, tell them,
Cum am salvat pe cei tineri din cuptorul cu foc,
as he saved the 3 young ones in the furnace,
îi voi salva și pe ei.
that is how he will save them.
Cum l-am salvat pe Daniel din gura
As he saved
leilor,
Daniel from the
îi
lions,
voi salva și pe
that
ei.
is how he will save them.
Numai să se întoarcă către
But they
Dumnezeu.
must repent.
Fraților, nu ne cere un lucru greu.
Brothers, God does not ask hard things of us.
Opriți-vă de la
We
păcatele
must
voastre.
stop sinning.
Întoarcă-